I had a high school classmate and friend of mine that, like many of my high school classmates and friends, was much smarter than me, much more talented in athletics. But this one in particular, Brian, again, just extremely intelligent, extremely athletic, a lot of hope, great goals in his life. But his life took a turn for the worse. And I think, in fact, a better way to say it is he put himself on a path toward destruction. As high school went on, Brian began to get into drinking, and that progressed into drugs, especially marijuana, then prescription pills. By his senior year, he was into cocaine. And he had actually achieved and was awarded a full-ride scholarship to college. And he lost that scholarship in his first semester in college due to drug use. And he was eventually expelled at the end of his freshman year from the university that he was at. He was then moved home, and it was not long after that his parents threw him out of his home. For a little while, he had an apartment and a job, but he eventually lost that. And Brian, by his mid-20s, had virtually nothing left to lose but his life. He was homeless. He had no friends really to speak of. By his mid-20s, that was his life. Absolute rock bottom. The only thing he had to lose was his life. And of course, all along the way, though, Brian came from a good family. All along the way, he had people trying to tell him to turn around and go the other way, trying to intervene and show him this is not the path you want to be on. His family did an intervention. Many of his friends did interventions. And that is something that we instinctually do, right? We do that instinctually. When we see people that we care about, when we see loved ones, when we just see anyone that is on any path that is leading to destruction, leading to doom, leading to death, we do our best to try and divert them. We do our best to try and get them to do an about-face and go the other way. And that's all Peter is doing in today's gospel. He's just trying to be a good friend to our Lord. Our Lord tells him, look, the Son of Man is going to suffer greatly at the hands of the chief priests and the scribes, and he's going to be killed. And what's Peter do? He steps in front of him. He says, God forbid, Lord. That's never going to happen to you. Is Peter such a bad guy for doing what any of us would do? To try and step in and get them to take a different path, a path that if they stay on it leads to their certain doom, and in our Lord's case, Calvary and death by way of crucifixion. Does he deserve to be called Satan for doing this? For just being a good friend? And in short, yes. Peter did deserve to be called Satan. He did deserve to be called an obstacle. Because that's exactly what he was being. Was Satan, but in the literal word, or in the literal meaning of that word. Not the evil one, the one who is in hell, the enemy of God, but Satan itself literally just means adversary. One who is acting against, kind of in contra, or against Jesus and his mission. And Jesus clarifies that, calling Peter an obstacle. God is not here condemning Peter because he's being a good friend. God's not telling us that if we find people that are on a path to destruction, we need to get out of the way and let them continue down this path. That's not what Jesus is after here. Again, what he's after is something very specific regarding Peter. To stop thinking as a human being, and rather to start thinking like God. And Peter's thinking went wrong because, well, he stopped. He stopped paying attention. Right in the middle of our Lord's prediction. He heard that Jesus is going to suffer. He heard that Jesus is going to be killed. And that's where Peter stopped listening. But that's not where our Lord stopped. He said, on the third day, I will be raised. On the third day will be the resurrection. After this great tragedy, after tremendous suffering, there will be new life. And it will only be through this great suffering and this tremendous and tragic death. Only through those two things will we arrive at that third day, the day of the resurrection. Hope and a promise. And for that reason, because Peter isn't listening, he isn't paying attention, he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. Get out of my way. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." And the truth is, guys, we need Jesus to die. We needed Jesus to suffer. I remember a retreat that I was recently on in the spring. And the retreat master, a priest, was leading us all in the Stations of the Cross, a reflection on each of the stations. And if you've ever been to the Stations of the Cross, you know one of the kind of popular and pious ways to pray the Stations of the Cross is by utilizing our imaginations, kind of imagining each station and our Lord going through each station, and us as kind of an observer of our Lord through the stations. And so this priest was reading or doing a reflection on the 9th station as an observer, kind of his own imaginative prayer, and he's verbalizing it to us as an observer. And he certainly, in the 9th station is when our Lord falls the 3rd time. And so the priest began kind of starting out by saying how sorry he was, as he's looking at our Lord and apologizing and verbalizing his contrite heart to our Lord, who is now fallen for the 3rd time because of the weight of his and all of our sin. But I'll never forget how he ended his reflection on the 9th station. In his prayer, he told Jesus to get up. He said, "Lord, get up, because if you don't go and die, I cannot live. Lord, if you don't die, I can't live." And this is what our Lord knows. This is why he tells Peter to get out of his way. But more than that, invites him to think like God. That everything having to do with death, everything having to do with human suffering now is completely transformed and brings a promise that we could have never imagined. New life, new hope. This is the paradox of the cross. This is what our Lord changes. We look around our nation right now, and maybe to give a good image of this and the cross. For the last several years, we know that there's been huge division right in our nation. Not just politically, but racially, economically, socially, sexually, so many levels at which people have been divided in our nation. We have gone from person to policy and looking for hope in elected officials and various policies enacted in various activist groups. And none of it has given really that much hope. Everything has seemed to, at least at best, keep the same level of division, if not worsen it. Guys, the greatest source of hope, maybe right now in our nation, is where there is the greatest amount of suffering. The greatest source of hope for our nation right now, perhaps, is Houston, Texas, where lives have been absolutely ruined and devastated, never to be found again. Life as they know it is gone. Those citizens of Houston. This is a cross that is not going to be taken away. This is a form of suffering that is going to take a long time. But because it is maybe one of the greatest places of suffering right now in our nation, it is one of the greatest places of hope. And if we, like Peter, would just pay attention and see, not as human beings do, just death and destruction and suffering, but see as God does. And see the many instances of hope where, yes, life as they know it is over. But new life is being made possible through the cross, through suffering. Where there is suffering, where there is death, where there is the cross of Jesus Christ, there is our hope. And right now, its name is Houston, Texas.